Yeah, good evening. Mr. Mauersberger had a little problem with the disruption in the space-time continuum, which prevented him from being here today. But he used some sub-ESA channels to channel his presentation to me, so the talk will take place. The topic today is GPS tracking devices, how they work, where they usually are hidden, and what you can do against them. It has been relatively in the press in Germany because police was using these trackers to track some leftist activists, and there were also some high-profile court cases where GPS trackers have been used. They are also in use all over the world in a variety of settings and for all kinds of uses, and are getting more and more of a problem. So that's why we need to talk about what we can do about them. First question is, why do they use GPS? Isn't it sufficient to just use mobile phone tracking or other means of observation of position? General GPS gives the best accuracy that you can get from a positioning device. Under normal circumstances, you have typically better than 10 meters of accuracy, meaning that you can say down to the perfect address where the GPS device is. The receiver itself is passive, meaning it does not transmit. So GPS works by just receiving a signal from multiple satellites and calculating from these satellite signals the position. So the power consumption, which was very high in the beginning, so I remember my first GPS device that has been about that size and eat batteries for breakfast. And meanwhile, they have become very small and very power efficient. And the receiver performance, meaning under what conditions a GPS receiver could still receive a signal, has become much better. So meanwhile, the best reception sensitivity that is available on the market is in the region of minus 132 dB, which is basically way below the noise floor, and which also allows signal reception through walls and through other kinds of stuff that are in between the GPS receiver and the sky. So the only thing that's really blocking it is metal. Okay, this is basically the most important slide of the whole talk. It is about the components of the GPS receiver as it is currently found out there. So if you have questions on how it works right after this slide, please do them now because it's important for the rest of the talk. Okay, so basically the core components are an embedded CPU, GPS receiver, movement sensor, memory, and a GSM GPRS module, and also some power controller stuff that is possibly using the car power if it's built into a car to convert to a high power battery to feed the whole system. So when a modern GPS tracking device comes to life, the first thing that happens is it detects motion. And it detects the motion not by using the GPS receiver, but by detecting vibration. Vibration sensors can be made extremely cheap, so they are extremely tiny, 50-cent elements, and they can trigger an interrupt here at the embedded CPU. Basically, the thing notices when the car starts to move or when the whatever object is tracked starts to move, and only then wakes up the CPU. So meaning all the rest of the time, the thing doesn't eat any battery, except for the deep standby of the embedded CPU, which is nearly nothing. So next thing that happens is the CPU wakes up the GPS module, and the GPS module searches the sky and gets a signal and transmits it to the embedded CPU. So the CPU now can judge, okay, do we have already moved, or was this just the movement sensor flaking up because a large car was driving nearby or somebody moved the car a bit or whatever. So this is basically, this movement sensor is the key to getting the battery lifetimes of these GPS tracking devices into the region of weeks and months. So because the GPS, which is eating battery, is only waking up when motion is detected. So then some kind of processing can take place, maybe finding out if we are still on the position that have we last logged, or if something has moved. If we have moved, write down to flash memory, make sure that it goes into the log file. Okay, if there is a need to transmit this event to the outside world in the program, the CPU wakes up the GSM module here and reports position changes or whatever position data is in there. This could also be pre-stored position data in the flash memory. So there are a variety of strategies that we're talking about shortly that can also require that a certain number of positions needs to have accumulated before we do a transport to the outside world. This is also mainly for saving battery. Okay, the GSM GPS module then usually transmits the position data out via SMS or via GPRS. So this is the normal operation of a modern GSM GPS tracking system. Has everybody understood this, or are there questions on the functionality, how it works? Yeah? No. There are some models on the market that are using other external sensors like the wheels of cars, the wheel sensor from the brake in the car and so on. But usually this motion sensor is a very primitive small thing that just is basically, it's a small thing that rattles, and if the small, it's mostly lead or some other metal, moves in there, then a contact is made and the interrupt is generated. But usually this thing is too primitive to create anything that could improve the accuracy of the GPS data. I haven't seen a tracker module yet that uses a GPS because of, again, of power consumption, because you then need to wake up the GSM module more often. But if it comes into mobile phones, then of course that is to be expected then. Okay, then we continue. Another important thing is, if this unit books into the network, either via SMS or via GPRS, it can also receive on-the-fly updates for the commands and strategies. Meaning the owner of the tracker can say, if you leave a certain area, then I want live tracking enabled, meaning I want to have position all the time. Or they can say, okay, go into deep sleep if you leave a certain area and only report every hour or so. So there's a number of strategies that can be updated, and mostly they're updated over the air. Okay, so the typical strategies is only report the endpoints of movement. So if you want to track a person, you're mostly interested in what locations he visits and not so much what route he takes. So there may be other scenarios where you need to have specific position data all the time. Then you can, for instance, put the reporting to regular intervals, maybe every 5 minutes or so. But that eats battery a lot, because you need to then wake up the GSM module and so on and leave the GPS on all the time. Whereas in the first strategy, only to report endpoints, you can mostly work with the motion sensor. You basically only leave the CPU on and the motion sensor on, and only record the precise position when the position when a movement has started or ended. Another typical thing is reporting when certain areas are reached. For instance, an area of interest is reached by a tracked person, or if the person leaves a certain area. As I said, these strategies can be changed over the air. There are various means of reporting back the GPS position back to the owner of the tracking. We will go over them and discuss the different properties of those so that you can assess what most probably could be found when you're searching for a GPS tracker. The oldest systems that are still in the market are using SMS exclusively, basically one position per SMS. Newer systems also compress more positions into one SMS by leaving out data that is redundant. There are also systems that can do encryption. There are not very many. Most of them are really using clear text. SMS has the property that it works nearly everywhere. It works under extremely bad GSM network conditions. and it works in foreign networks, so it is basically the most robust service of all. The network has the nice property that it stores messages. So when you go and say to the unit, I want to update my strategy, then you just send an SMS to it, and whenever the unit switches on the GSM module, it receives the SMS and then executes the command. So SMS is frequently also used not only for reporting but for command updates. It is relatively slow, meaning you can have delivery times in the minutes or hours if SMS is clogged, and is relatively costly. So if you are having something like live tracking, meaning that you want to really know every 5 minutes or so where a certain tracker is, then SMS can get really expensive over time. The most frequently used means of reporting today is GPRS. It allows for smooth live tracking because you have an IP connection. Can also be encrypted, compressed to reduce data volume. And if it's done right, meaning only switching on certain times and so on, then it can also conserve battery a lot. The drawback is that if you want to reach the tracker with a strategy update, it needs to be online at that time. So meaning that you need to program it to be online at a certain prearranged time or in a certain area or whatever. And it requires an IP-based monitoring station where the tracking packets go, which means that if somebody finds the tracker, he may have more clues on who placed the tracker on him, because he finds out what IP address this thing reports to. What is frequently used in logistics is satellite links for reporting. There are a variety of satellite services, Thuraya, Omnistar, Iridium, so all the usual suspects. Most of them have worldwide coverage or at least large area coverage. And the good thing for certain users is that it doesn't leave any traces in the local network, meaning if you're tracing something that has good relationships to the local network, then the local operator might get alerted that there's a certain amount of trackers in the network. If you're using the satellite links, this does not happen. It has relatively high battery consumption. Usually these things are found at shipping containers or large trucks or so that don't have a power problem. The services that are used can be both like SMS or like GPRS. There are even some that just do data call, basically a modem call to update the position, but these are very old. What is also still a bit around is using a radio, normal old-fashioned VHF or UHF radio. So you're recording the position of the car by GPS, and then sending out a datagram of a radio with the position, meaning that the person who tracks the tracker needs to be in the vicinity, so at least in reception range of the radio signal, and it eats battery, but since it doesn't use the GSM network, you can relatively easily avoid to be jammed or detected, because the radio signal could be a spectrum or whatnot and be on very unusual frequency ranges and so on. Another interesting means of reporting, and that's the hardest to detect, is offline reporting, meaning that the tracker only stores the position. Basically, it is a GPS receiver with a large memory that you can put somewhere, and that records just all the position at certain intervals or certain locations and stores them into flash memory. Then you can retrieve the location log either physically by removing the memory or the tracker from the car or whatever you track, or there are now meanwhile other methods like you have a small GPS receiver with a large memory that has also a Bluetooth module. And so what you do is you program it to be paired with the PDA, and you just need to walk by the car of the suspect to retrieve the GPS log. So the drawback is, of course, that you cannot do live tracking, and that the update interval is entirely dependent on when you will be able to get to the suspect's car and retrieve the log. These things, as I said, are very hard to find because they have very little emission. There are also versions around that have either remotely by radio triggerable or time release electromagnet that neutralizes the magnet that holds the thing under the car, meaning that if you want to retrieve the memory, then you trigger the release mechanism and the thing falls down to the street and you can collect it. Okay. This is a tracker that has been found on a car. It is one of the models that at least the images on the internet where I found this stuff these are images from a lawyer, and he says that these are models that are used by German police. As you can see here, the basic elements. We have here the GPS antenna. This is the GSM antenna. These are the batteries, and this is the electronics compartment. And the usual enclosure that also can hold magnets to hold this thing together. So this is more images of that. These are other images that I found on the internet of trackers that are apparently have been used by German authorities. Basically here, same thing. This looks like the GSM antenna that we had in the image before. This is probably the electronics package, and here we see the GPS antenna, and then the large rest is probably then the battery pack. And this is another thing here. You see a pack of cigarettes as a comparison. So it's a relatively small setup. These are trackers here that are commercially available in spy shops. What you can see here very nicely are the magnets that are used to attach the whole thing, and it has a combination antenna here for GSM and GPS in the same antenna package. This is actually a receiver that has been found under a car of an activist, and then has been auctioned off in a public auction to the highest bidder, which happened to be another left activist. And yeah, we can here see again the whole package. It has been apparently wrapped in gaffer tape before it has been stuck under the car of the suspect. The monitoring, that's also an interesting question, is how does the monitoring work? Most commercial systems today are simply using Google Earth or Google Maps to do the monitoring. There are others that use dedicated software, but also these are mostly plugins to commercial mapping software like Map and Route and other stuff. Frequently the location updates are sent to mobile phones or PDAs so that you can see on the move what is happening. And what's also very interesting is that long-term tracking is frequently used so that you can build up a behavioral profile of your suspect. This is a typical output of such a logging software. You basically see the endpoint of movements of the suspect. You have here the list of time and date, address, which is frequently very useful, the speed that has been used by the suspect so that you could see how fast he was driving, current event log, what course he was driving, and so on. So you can do the usual map things that this is one of the dedicated software devices. This is tracks, GPS tracks on Google Maps and Google Earth. As you see here, this is a very detailed track where a lot of positions have been recorded. So you see really every movement that this GPS has done through a park and so on. Whereas that one here is an track log that has fewer intermediate points where you can just see the general movement of the GPS. Okay, there are more things like this is a log where you can easily see where the car has been accelerating and braking and so on. And this is also, for instance, used in rental cars. There are a lot of rental cars, especially in the US, that contain GPS trackers, and there is circumstantial evidence that they're used for suing you when you're driving too fast. This is another one of the from the propaganda of a manufacturer of GPS. How's it called? When they put it on your feet. So basically, this is your sex offender. Here in red are schools, and he needs to be away from schools. So this is then what his probation officer can see on his unit. Okay, what is happening next is there is a large wave of cheap GPS units coming from China. So, and they're mostly targeted on the civilian market. So there are trackers in teddy bears for tracking the kids. There are grandma trackers, cat and dog trackers, trackers to be attached to a UPS parcel, trackers to be attached to your car, and so on. And they're becoming very common. So this is a random selection of GPS GSM tracking units that are currently on the market. So that one is from Sony. That is can be attached via Bluetooth to your digital camera, so that you can geocode all your pictures. So this thing is nicely named Freedom for Pet, which is should be attached to your dog or so. This is one of the units that they sell you in the spy shop for horrendous amounts of money. That one there is for your grandma. The walkabout, which gives your grandparents the freedom of movement and the peace that you still know where they are. This is for your kids, and that's called iKids. It's also sold by Chibo now, and that thing here is called, I think, NanoCare, which is a unit that is also aimed at the same market, maybe grandmas and so on. And of course there are nicely colorful wristwatches for your kids that do the same. So meaning the technology is small enough that it can be fitted into a wristwatch. Yeah. Yes. That's these units, except for the Sony one, are all GSM GPS. So the Sony one is only Bluetooth because it only needs to talk to the camera. Yeah, this is if you're active and sporty, then you can log your daily jogging or bike course within a GPS unit and then upload to your Web2O jogger community so that everybody knows where you're jogging. Of course, it also records how fast you are and what the geo-profile of the areas where you were jogging and so on. And this is the Schnuffy tracker, where you can attach to your dog and see where he roams. Yeah, this is what they use to track criminal offenders, or maybe all of us someday. That is basically the same thing as the colorful wristwatch for kids, packaged for tracking people who are on probation. Other stuff that I happen to see where there seems to be around software for navigation systems, for in-car navigation systems, that basically can be used to record all your movements on your own car navigation system that are then later extracted by Bluetooth. So if you look at, for instance, the TomTom, that is a very simple Linux-based navigation system that can be easily modified. And so it's rather trivial to add a small daemon that just logs everything and then dumps it off to a certain Bluetooth unit. So this software is of course sold in spy shops for hundreds of dollars. But this is something that you need to be aware. So if you're going to buy a tracking, navigation unit, still called, then be aware that it should have no Bluetooth, and that you know all the time where it is, so that nobody can retrieve your movements. Mobile phones with AGPS, that was a question earlier, are coming, meaning that the position accuracy of the GPS is assisted by the network. For instance, the network is sending off the approximate position that is generated from locating the mobile phone in the network to the mobile phone, so that the mobile phone can initialize the GPS unit faster. So it gives faster tracking and better accuracy. Yeah, we can also buy, meanwhile, I think 3 different brands of GPS wristwatches. That is no, that's not the GPS one. I also have a GPS one. So the technology has become very small and very power saving. Okay, the commercial applications are basically what you would expect: rental cars, taxis, ambulance, police, and so on. One thing that is interesting is the so-called roadside assistance system, which is there to basically, if you drive into a tree on the side of the street, your car will tell the emergency center where your car is stuck. Okay, so now enough of the boring stuff. the interesting question is, where are they hidden and how do we find them? Typically there are 3 different methods of attachment of a tracker to specifically a car. What is used if it needs to be quick and there's no long-term access to the car, then it is just a walk-by where with magnets the tracker unit is attached somewhere to a metal surface on the car. It's usually wheelhouse or bumper, but we come to that later. Another method is that is very frequently used, especially with smaller modern cars that have plastic bumpers, is that the unit is glued with epoxy and a sheet of carbon reinforced plastics into the room behind the plastic bumper, so that if you're taking off the bumper you see just something that looks like black carbon. So it could be that it's normal on the car if you don't know what it is, and it's very flat. And another method that I know that is being used is that cars are made to have small accidents, like somebody is softly ramming his car while you're parked into your car and saying, oh sorry, and of course my insurance will do everything to make you happy. And then when you drive your car then to a repair shop, some friendly people come by and ask the repairman to stay outside for an hour or 2 and install the unit inside the car in the repair shop. This is the most preferred method because then the tracking unit can be really well hidden inside the car, so that you have basically no chance of finding it except if you really disassemble the car. In order to basically reverse engineer the processes where they put stuff into the car, we need to understand the reasons for choosing certain positions, because some of them are not obvious. The main thing is that the GPS antenna needs to see the sky at least a bit. It can be behind all kinds of plastic, but being completely behind metal surfaces prevents reception. So if it is on the edge of the wheelhouse, for instance, so that it sees the sky a very little bit, then that's enough. So if it's really deep inside the wheelhouse, then the chance of seeing sky is not very great, except if your car is made of plastic. So stuff like that. The receivers are getting very good. So there are, for instance, receivers that can be safely hidden under the passenger seat. So and all the stuff that's around it is not a problem because it sees a bit of sky through the windows. If you want to install this thing as long-term tracking, then access to the car power is very, very interesting. Then if it has access to the car power, this thing can work for years. The longest claimed working life for battery-based stuff that I have seen is 6 months, which is with large lithium-ion one-way batteries that are extremely expensive. And if you can tap the car power, then you can live longer with the unit. What's very important, it must not fall off, at least not accidentally, or be otherwise easily detected. So if you put it in a place where it is, when the owner of the car drives a bit rough, it falls off, then it might get a bit problematic. Another thing that frequently led to discovery of GSM GPS trackers was when interference on the car radio of the GSM, this patap, 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 was to be heard when the unit reported back home, and the owner of the car was very sure that he has no mobile phone switched on. That usually then yields to the car owner completely disassembling his car to find what is making patap, patap, patap on his car radio. Okay, so these are typical placements that have been observed. So the favorite is bumpers are made generally on modern cars of plastic, meaning that everything that sits here or there or anywhere in this strange ornaments that they put on plastic on front of cars has good GPS reception. Another very nice placement method is if you have one of these nice plastic spoilers on the back of your car, frequently seen with drug dealers, then they can have actual replacement spoilers that they can just click off yours and plug in theirs that contains the tracker. So also typical for, especially for quick attachments, is putting it in the wheelhouse and making sure that the GPS antenna sits on the very edge so that it sees a bit of sky on the side. Also very new stuff in the rear view mirrors. These mirrors are usually made of plastic and there's lots of room in there, especially in the newer cars that have all these kind of fancy electronic and anti-blending and heating and stuff like that. Then you can put them there, or putting them in the middle rear view mirror. A lot of them in modern cars have also power supply for doing all kinds of fancy electronic stuff, so that's not too bad. If you have access to the car for a very long time, meaning in the repair shop, then the perfect point of placement is under the dashboard, either front or rear. And if you're in the front, then you can also tap the power of the sound system or whatever and integrate it very well. Also, most modern cars have in the front access to the CAN bus, which is the car internal bus that transports all the signals from ABS, brakes, and so on. And then you can even use the wheel sensors of the car to get better accuracy, like navigation systems do, so that you plug them into the CAN bus. So if you're suspicious for them having installed stuff on your, looking under the dashboards is the first place to look if your car was in repair recently. What has also been reported is that the side fillings of doors where there are some upholstery on there. As you can see on the top graph, the car is very pyramidal, meaning that it sees a lot of sky in the side windows if the trackers are attached here inside the upholstery. One thing that I found very funny is there are ready-made replacement headrests. So that can be just basically open door, extract headrest, put a new headrest. Maybe if the old one is a bit worn, replace the envelope, the textile around it. And a lot of cars have large glass windows on top, meaning that even on the driver's seat you have a lot of sky, and you can also hide under the passenger seat. So basically you just stick it under the passenger seat, because most of the time people drive alone. So and maybe if they don't drive alone, then you don't get tracking, but most of the time you get tracking, and it can be done very quickly. Also, it can be done very surreptitiously when there's an intelligence agent or whatever driving with you in your car without you knowing. Then you can just slip the thing under the seat. One thing that's very elegant is most modern cars have already built-in GPS systems. So the only thing that they're needing is a bit of electronic that grabs the signal of the GPS and transmit it back home. Also, in these things there are often very nice GSM antennas that can be used. So a lot of cars just require a software update to be tracked. So one thing that's not in there is on motorbikes, the typical hiding position is in the passenger seat. So basically, the source use is called. You're just in the upholstery, or if you're driving a plastic or a motorbike, then somewhere in the plastic parts. Yeah, how to find them? Currently, the only really reliable method of finding trackers in cars or other objects is physical search. The same thing holds actually also true for audio bugs. Some of the spy shop gear has also the option to transmit back the audio spoken in the car over GSM if desired. So these trackers can also be functioning as GSM-based tapping devices that, for instance, sample the voice inside the car, compress it, and send it off while the car is not in motion and you're not in the car. So finding trackers and other electronic updates on your car requires physical search. If it's a software update on your navigation system, then good luck. There are, however, indications. If you know your car very well and know how it behaves, then you may notice that there is a bit more drawing on power if the GPS bug is attached to the car power. This is not very reliable, of course. What you also can do is looking for GSM emissions. As I explained earlier, most trackers today have this motion sensor, meaning that the GSM unit can be programmed to only be active if the car stands still or if it's in motion or whatever. You cannot really predict how this unit will behave because it's entirely dependent on the program that they're using on the tracker. So a telltale sign is if you're having GSM interference on your car radio and all your phones are switched off. So this is actually how a lot of trackers have been found. So because GSM makes strong emissions, and if they are not properly placed away from the car radio antenna, then you will hear the interference. Also, if you know your car very well, then you can look for small changes in the usual hiding places. So seams not really fitting, glue traces, stuff that's cleaner than usual. So most cars are not really clean. And if there's a new part on your car that's cleaner than usual, then you might get suspicious. So, but there's also stuff like dust spray and artificial mud that can be used to resemble the usual state of your car. Okay, one thing that's an interesting idea is it should be possible to build a GPS receiver detector. This is the typical layout of an GPS receiver. You basically have an antenna, first stage filter, low noise amplifier, and then you have a mixer that is mixing in a signal, a reference signal from a voltage controlled oscillator, and that generates a mixing product which is usually lower band because it's mostly a substructive filter that goes then into the analog digital converter. Basically you just have here the signal reduced to the bandwidth that you actually need to process, and that goes then into the DSP and CPU. And so if we look at that, we have a lot of interesting signals there. We have an oscillator, we have the reference signal going into the mixer, we have the clock driver that is generating signal, we have the mixer output, and possibly some stuff may leak out. Could happen. Actually, that's the case. Initial findings show that there are signals from all GPS receivers tested that can be seen under laboratory conditions. They are relatively low frequency, mostly under 50 megahertz, which makes it a bit difficult to build a reliable measurement setup except coupling directly on the antenna. There are clear multiples of the signal can be seen. So basically it's looking that way, and you can see the same peak over a wider frequency spectrum in the same frequency distance to each other. So it's a very, very clear signal. What's also interesting is that the signal differs between different GSM chipsets, which is explained by this setup here. This might be different from chipset to chipset, and actually it is. So basically the oscillator frequency is different from chipset to chipset. So what you see actually on the output of leaking is a mix of various signal sources. So it's not a clean, crisp signal, but there are multiple signals overlaying, but it's always a relatively telltale sign. And so the challenge is what is needed to build a GPS receiver detector is a good portable antenna for this frequency, which basically will be a magnetic loop antenna. There are no other antenna types, at least that I know of, that are portable and work in this low frequency area. There also needs to be made a decision if it's worth building a hardware receiver for this signal, or if it's more useful using something like GNU Radio to build a detector that can be adapted by software to the various GPS chipsets. What also would be very desirable is having the thing integrated into a end-user safe device. So not something where you need an electronics engineer that fiddles around with GNU Radio, but something that could be built into a handheld device that just gives you a red, green, and yellow LED signs, or so whatever. That would be very good. So I know that's very hard, but that would be something to aim for. So what that would be, what would require would be a logic or a hardware that detects the various types of signals emitted by these different GPS chipsets. What also needs to be thought of is you need a modus operandi to trigger the motion sensor, because if your car is standing around, then this whole thing will be completely dead. So what you need to find out is in process, maybe driving a bit and then shaking your car or jumping on it or whatever to trigger a motion sensor and make this thing wake up and give you a nice and clean signal. Another topic that usually comes up in this range is jamming. There are jammers on the market, mostly made in China or Poland. They're very small, so the smallest I know is basically a plug for the cigarette lighter. It has a small antenna, but the problem is that if you don't want to jam your whole neighborhood and everybody around and the airplanes and the trucks and everything, which would come along with using like a 500 milliwatt GPS jammer, then you need various units placed around your car emitting smaller jamming signals. As I said, receivers are very sensitive, meaning at 130 or 132 dB minus sensitivity, you need a relatively powerful jamming signal to prevent it from seeing position at all. And so building them into a car in a way that jams exactly the car and not everything around it is kind of difficult. So also jamming, at least with higher powers, is illegal in the US. You cannot legally buy or make and sell these jammers. So there's something that needs to be weighted against the use. So interestingly, the change in German law that made GPS jamming illegal came together with the introduction of the Autobahn mount, because the Autobahn mount is GPS dependent. So and if somebody would place a GPS jammer near an Autobahn intersection, then all things would go wrong. As I said, if you want to jam, be very careful. It is could have rather nasty unintended consequences. The jamming signal that is usually used is just adding noise to the band, basically to the GPS band. There are other more interesting methods of building GPS jammers that could work with very, very low power but very high efficiency, but these are a bit more complicated. Basically what you would do is following the hopping sequence of the GPS signal, which is known, and introducing your energy exactly at the right point at the right time, so basically saving their energy in the split vector hopping signal to jam only what you need to jam, not everything else. But as I said, jamming is not really recommended. Okay, summary. You need to, in order to find GPS trackers, you need to physically search your car. At the moment, there is no other reliable way, so everything else is just indicators or maybe not. If you hear GSM interference in your car and your mobile phone is often, there is apparently something that is interfering with your car radio, so go search for it. You should be knowing your car service very well, so where you get your car into repair, then maybe you should pay them a little extra to be sure that if nice people show up that want to be with your car alone for 2 hours, then they tell you. Yeah, and if you have some first-hand knowledge with low frequency stuff, then you could think about building in the GPS detector. Happy searching. Thank you. Do we have a microphone?
Are there any plans on fake GPS senders that tell the GPS receiver you are in Mallorca or so?
I cannot really understand you. It's too loud.
A little bit of silence, please. Everybody shut up. We are not finished yet.
Sorry? Are there any plans on fake GPS senders? So to fake your position? As example, tell the GPS receiver you are in Mallorca?
There are actually, as I said, there are various methods of jamming GPS. One is brute force, just jamming the signal. Another is spoofing the position. Actually, spoofing the position might even have more unintended consequences than just jamming the signal, but it's also technically more interesting, of course. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry. Yeah. You said that the transmitting the position is usually done through a GSM module. Wouldn't it be easier, instead of jamming the GPS signal, jamming the GSM signal?
Yes, but then you would need to be sure that A, the transmission is being done over GSM, and it's not just a store unit that just stores the position, and B, jamming GSM has even more unintended consequences.
How can the owner know if the device is still in the right place?
Ich verstehe keinen Ton.
How can the owner know if the device is still in the right place?
Okay, the question was how the people trying to track you can be sure that the device is still in your car. They cannot, of course. Some devices have a remove switch, which is basically a small micro switch that triggers if the device is moved from its position. Basically, if you disattach it, then the micro switch triggers and either transmits the event or erases the memory, or both. In theory, could also go up in flames, but I haven't heard of that. But if you find such a thing, then a good idea is, of course, sliding a small piece of metal between the car and the tracker unit, so that you don't trigger the switch, and then attach it to somebody else's car or whatever. So usually the best thing is what you can do with these things, if you're not technically interested in finding out how they work, is just attaching them to a garbage truck. That would drive them nuts. Okay, then thank you very much. Yeah.